Good morning. My name is Linda Schott, and I am an extension specialist with the University of Idaho based in Twin Falls. The title of my presentation is Perceptions of Manure Use in Cropping Systems in Southern Idaho. And that title might sound a little bit familiar, probably because there was a presentation with a very similar title right before this. And I'll explain a little bit about why my presentation is so similar in just a few minutes. So I wanted to start with a little bit of background about what I did. So I started my position in January 2019 after earning my PhD at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And my dissertation really surrounded the soil health impacts of manure and manure byproducts in various cropping systems. And that really became my passion. And I really was curious about what were producer perceptions surrounding manure and byproducts. And were there differences between crop producers and livestock producers and their advisors? And so when I started my position here, that really carried through to really trying to understand my clientele. So I started my position in Idaho and quickly came to understand all of the statistics about Idaho agriculture. So Idaho actually ranks 4th in the nation for dairy production, and that's a statistic from 2019. However, consistently, Idaho ranks in the top 3 or 4. Idaho also ranks in the top 10 for potato, barley, hay, sugar beet, corn silage, and dry bean production. That's a lot of crops. And coincidentally, almost all of that agricultural production, both dairy and crops, occurs in this 8-county region that I've highlighted on the state of Idaho. This area, known as the Magic Valley, accounts for just 16% of the farms, but over 50% of the agricultural valuation for the state. And so, as the Soil Nutrient and Waste Management Extension Specialist, part of building my program is understanding my clientele. And so I really wanted to know, what are the current perceptions of dairymen, crop producers, and their advisors on the role of manure in cropping systems? What barriers exist for the movement of manure and other byproducts from dairy facilities to third-party receivers? And so I conducted a needs assessment that was based on a larger one led by Dr. Rick Kelch from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and that presentation preceded this one. I asked a total of 31 questions, although none of the respondents had to answer all 31. We used Qualtrics to kind of guide those respondents through the appropriate questions based on their previous responses. Some of the questions were slightly altered or significantly altered, and that was really to form that survey into more of a needs assessment for my program, and also make it more applicable to producers in the West, specifically to producers in Idaho. And I gave the survey to a couple of focus groups to just see how they would respond and make sure that those questions made sense to the respondents here. For example, some advisors, all advisors, were also asked what their perceptions of the challenges that their clients face to manure utilization. Because I really wanted to understand, is there a disconnect between advisors and dairy and crop producers in what challenges exist to manure usage? Both online and paper versions were created and distributed to a variety of commodity lists, newsletters, in-person events in the winter and spring of 2020. Paper versions were then entered into Qualtrics and the data was analyzed. So I'm just going to go through this a little bit. I had a total of 111 respondents that answered enough questions that were valuable. So I think there was 126 total, and a lot of them were the ones between 126 and 111, that difference, or because they'd answered no, they didn't make any sort of decisions on manure or fertility. They're not crop producers, they're not livestock producers, they're not advisors. They don't really have anything to do with it, but they did fill out the survey. And so those responses were taken out for the analysis, and that left me with 111. And as you can see, there was a nice split between crop farmers and advisors, and then each accounting for 34 and 24% respectively. There was also a large number of animal feeding operation respondents, which for here essentially means a dairyman or someone who is making decisions on a dairy. There are some beef feedlots and things like that, but the majority were dairymen who I targeted for this study. And as you can see, there's also a number of respondents that were both crop producers and dairymen, and those accounted for 19%. And then there's some others that served multiple roles, including 3% that were wearing all three hats. And so of those advisors, there were a total of 24 of them, and over half of them are in retail and technical sales. And then there's also folks that were serving in independent technical services, in positions at NRCS and the university and an extension. We also asked about respondent experience, and there was a really broad variety of that, which a little bit surprised me. So about a quarter of the respondents had less than 5 years of experience, but then there was also 21% that had over 30 years of experience, and that's a pretty wide breadth and relatively evenly distributed between those two extremes. So of those that were crop or animal livestock producers, they approximately, well, exactly 63% responded that they were annual users of manure or manure byproducts, while 18% indicated they were frequent users, and 13% indicated that they never used it. And for the advisors, those 24 individuals that served in advising roles, over half of them report that they occasionally include manure as part of their agronomic consulting, whereas 13% indicated it was their primary focus, so they primarily recommend manure usage, and 29% said it's frequently part of their program. And so then we asked about whether or not manure and inorganic fertilizers are competing or complementary. And almost 3/4, 71%, indicated that the two products are complementary. 7% said that they were competing and manure was preferred, whereas 11% indicated that they were competing with inorganic fertilizer preferred. And 11% said that they're very independent and they don't really have anything to do with each other, and there's different situations when you would apply either one of those products. So then we asked everyone, to what degree do you consider manure to benefit or harm these cropping characteristics? And as you can see, in general, for pretty much every single, for every metric, well over half of the respondents indicated that manure was at least neither harmful nor beneficial. And then for the majority, over 50%, indicated that it was at least slightly beneficial. The metrics that were most beneficial, that were perceived as most beneficial, were providing crop nutrients and nutrient cycling, soil biology, soil water holding capacity, and crop yield. And those that were viewed as maybe a little bit more harmful, or at least not super beneficial, were nutrient loss off field, erosion, and soil compaction, and also water runoff. So then we asked, how knowledgeable are you of manure's impact on the following? And this question was asked to everyone. And as you can see, everyone viewed themselves as at least slightly knowledgeable. There were very few that felt like they weren't knowledgeable about these areas. And so the areas that the respondents felt that they were least knowledgeable about were erosion, nutrient loss off field, and soil crusting. And at least for erosion, water runoff, and nutrient loss off field, those areas were also the ones that manure was not necessarily viewed as favorable or beneficial. So then we asked the advisors about how they felt about their clients and how knowledgeable they were. And it actually kind of lined up about the same. In this instance, the advisors in Idaho viewed their clients as pretty knowledgeable on these subjects, while the percentages were a little bit lower on the very knowledgeable part and slightly higher on not knowledgeable or slightly knowledgeable. Overall, advisors viewed their clients pretty highly in their knowledge, with providing crop nutrients being by far the area that they felt their clients were most knowledgeable about. So then this is kind of where I separated out between advisors and those that are producing agricultural products, whether it's dairy or crops. And I looked at, it was just a ranking. It was very similar to the other study, the other survey. And this is how those agricultural producers ranked their challenges. Their number one challenge was an economic one, and it was the cost of manure transport and land application. There's also time and labor requirements for application. Weed seed introduction ranked fairly high. Timeliness of manure nutrient application, odor and air quality, application in the winter or when it's wet, flies, compaction, foreign materials in manure was a relatively big one. And then also regulatory compliance with costs. And I just want to point out before I move on to the next slide that the time and labor requirements ranked number 2 for agricultural producers. And so then when we look at the advisors' perceptions of what their clients' challenges are, it was a little bit different. So the top concern was the same. It was the cost of manure transport and land application. But the second one was odor and air quality. And that didn't rank quite as high. It was in the top 10, but it definitely wasn't number 2 for producers. Weed seed introduction was number 3 on both. And then there were quite a few agronomic concerns: unpredictability, poor uniformity, compaction, that was on the last one. Then there was timeliness, imbalance of nitrogen and phosphorus supplied by the manure, high concentration of undesirable nutrients, potential risks to food crops, and then the time and labor, which was number 2 on the other one, is now number 10. It says 8, but that's because there were some of these ranked the same. So, I mean, it's sort of 8, but also sort of 10. But I also wanted to point out that there's a lot more agronomic ones on this list for the advisors. So there's 6 of them on the one of how advisors view their clients' challenges, but there's only 3 agronomic challenges on the other one. And then I also wanted to point out that on the other 4 producers, they didn't even rank the manure application to food crops and the potential risk for that in the top 10. It just doesn't seem to be a concern. So there definitely seems to be a mismatch between advisors and what they think the challenges for their producers are versus what producers say their challenges are. And so I also asked about How do all the respondents make their decisions? And I split it out by producers and advisors. And so you can see almost everyone, a lot of the respondents indicated that their personal thoughts were how they base their decision-making process. And also they're using a network of other farmers. And that's really great. The research articles and brief science fact sheets were a little bit lower in usage, and advisors seem to use that more than producers. And very few people are using Twitter or Facebook or podcasts. And so just briefly to go through some of the conclusions, the majority of the respondents in this needs survey reported that they recognize manure as beneficial to soil health. They also indicated that they are at least somewhat knowledgeable on the impacts of manure on soil health properties. And it seems like the advisors think pretty highly of their clients, especially compared to the larger survey. And this could also be because of sample size. I only ended up with 24 advisors, and that larger study was a much larger group of respondents. Advisors also perceive the challenges that their producers face very differently than the producers identified their challenges. And this might cause bias when advising on agronomic benefits of manure. A lot of these advisors were saying that they at least occasionally recommend manure, but I wonder if these internal biases about the agronomic challenges associated with manure is what's driving them to maybe not include manure as part of their agronomic plans and recommendations for producers. And then the majority of respondents use personal thoughts and experiences for decision making, followed by a network of producers. And this is somewhere that my program can really step in and hopefully produce some more science-based fact sheets and short articles that can help add more science to personal thoughts and experiences. And so I'll just leave this acknowledgement slide up, and thank you all for watching my presentation.